On the morning of May 9, 1945, General George S. Patton woke before the sun. There was no artillery in the distance, no engines coughing to life in the darkness, no field telephones ringing with reports of enemy armor, no staff officer standing outside his door with a map under one arm and bad news written across his face. For the first time in years, Europe was officially silent. Patton lay still for several seconds, listening to that silence. He had imagined victory many times. During the long months in North Africa, Sicily, France, Luxembourg, and Germany, he had pictured the end of the war as something enormous. Bells ringing, bands playing, soldiers shouting in every street. Instead, victory had arrived like exhaustion. A signature in a headquarters far away. A message delivered through command channels. An order telling millions of men that, at a specific hour, they were to stop killing one another. The silence did not feel peaceful to him. It felt watchful. Patton rose, washed in cold water, shaved carefully, and put on his uniform. He fastened each button with the precision of a ritual. His ivory-handled pistols were not required that morning, but he wore them anyway. They were part of the figure his soldiers expected to see. Yet when he looked to the mirror, he saw more than the polished helmet, the stars, and the hard blue eyes. He saw Bastogne under snow. He saw burned tanks beside roads that had no names on American maps. He saw young men who had laughed over breakfast and died before lunch. And he saw a concentration camp his troops had recently entered. That memory came most often when the world became quiet. The fences. The smell. The faces of survivors who looked too weak to belong to the living and too alert to belong to the dead. Some of Patton's men had turned away. Others had vomited. A few had stood completely still, as if their minds had refused to understand what their eyes had seen. Patton had forced himself to look. A commander, he believed, did not possess the right to turn away from the destination of the road his army had traveled. There was a knock at the door. "Come." Colonel Robert Hayes entered carrying a folder. Hayes was 42, quiet, steady, and almost completely without theatrical instinct. Patton valued him for precisely that reason. "Morning, General. What's on fire?" "Nothing, sir." "Then somebody isn't doing his job." Hayes allowed the smallest hint of a smile. "We have the surrender and processing ceremony at the Feldkirchen barracks outside Munich. 53 German officers, mostly senior staff personnel from units that withdrew through Bavaria. SS-3 are being investigated for possible connections. The rest identify themselves as regular army. They always do." "Yes, sir." "Who commands them?" "General Klaus von Rothenburg, 58 years old, old Prussian family. Served in the last war. No party membership found in the initial record. That means he was smart enough not to carry the card." Hayes opened the folder. "He claims he was never a Nazi. Says he remained in service to protect the army from political influence." Patton reached for his gloves. "And how did that work out?" Hayes did not answer. Patton glanced toward the window. The gray morning was beginning to reveal the roofs of a defeated country. Somewhere beyond the headquarters, civilians were already searching ruins for bricks, food, relatives, or all three. "General," Hayes said carefully, "the ceremony is intended to be simple. Flag raising, formal acknowledgement of Allied authority, surrender documents. Then transfer to the processing teams. Simple ceremonies are where complicated men reveal themselves. The press section may send a photographer. Then tell him to photograph the truth, not a parade." Patton walked to the door, then stopped. "Hayes, sir, the war is over. That means every fool in Europe is going to start rewriting what he did during it." Hayes closed the folder. "Yes, sir. The Germans will say they were all prisoners of Hitler. The politicians will say they resisted him. The businessmen will say they knew nothing. And the officers will say they were soldiers without politics." Patton's voice became quieter. "But somebody drove the trains. Somebody guarded the roads. Somebody signed the orders. Somebody saw their neighbors disappear and decided breakfast was more important." He placed his gloves beneath his belt. "Today, Colonel, we begin finding out which men are ready to tell the truth." Outside, a line of staff cars waited in the damp morning. American soldiers came to attention as Patton appeared. Some looked tired enough to sleep standing up. Others still carried the stunned expression of men who had survived something they had expected would kill them. Patton returned their salutes. As his car moved through the streets, Munich appeared in fragments. A church tower without a roof. A tramcar burned black beside twisted tracks. Women passing bricks hand to hand. Children watching American vehicles with a mixture of fear, hunger, and curiosity. White sheets hung from windows as signs of surrender. Some were clean. Others were made from tablecloths, bed linen, or torn shirts. A boy of perhaps 9 stood beside a crater holding a wooden toy soldier. As Patton's car passed, the child lifted the toy and made it march along the edge of the broken pavement. Patton turned his eyes forward. The armies had stopped. The habits that created armies had not. At the edge of the city, the convoy passed a column of German prisoners. Their uniforms were dirty, their shoulders bent. A few looked toward Patton's vehicle. Most stared at the road. He wondered how many of them were already practicing the sentence they would repeat for the rest of their lives. "I had no choice." It was the phrase Patton distrusted most. Men often had choices. The problem was that the decent choice was usually expensive, lonely, and dangerous. Afterward, when the cost had been paid by someone else, they convinced themselves no choice had ever existed. The Feldkirchen barrack stood behind a stone wall scarred by shell fragments. An American flag flew over the gate. Military police guarded the entrance. Hayes checked his watch. 53 German officers are assembled in the courtyard. Armed? No, sir. Searched? Twice. Good. A man can surrender a pistol and keep an entire war inside his head. The car stopped. Patton stepped out. The wet air smelled of stone, smoke, and spring earth. Somewhere inside the barracks, 53 defeated officers were waiting to meet him. The war had ended less than 36 hours earlier. Patton was about to discover how little surrender could mean. General Klaus von Rothenburg had spent his entire life learning how not to appear afraid. As a child, he had been taught to sit straight at the dinner table, while his father described cavalry charges from another age. As a cadet, he had learned that discomfort was private and hesitation contagious. In the First World War, he had learned that men looked to an officer's face before deciding whether the situation was hopeless. By 1945, the lessons remained even though nearly everything else had vanished. The family estate east of Berlin was probably in Soviet hands. His eldest son had been killed near Kharkiv. His younger son had disappeared during the collapse in Hungary. His wife had not answered his last 3 letters. The army to which his family had devoted generations no longer existed. Still, von Rothenburg stood at the head of the formation with his back straight and his gloves folded in his left hand. Behind him were 52 officers. They represented what remained of several headquarters units, training commands, transport staffs, and shattered field formations. A few had fought on the front lines. Others had spent the war moving symbols across maps while soldiers and civilians died beneath those symbols. Their uniforms were unusually clean. That had been deliberate. The night before, von Rothenburg had ordered every man to present himself according to regulations. Boots polished, decorations worn, jackets brushed. No one was to appear before the Americans like a beggar. "We have surrendered our weapons," he had told them, "not our dignity." Most had responded with approval. 12 had remained silent. Among those 12 was Major Friedrich Adler, a former school teacher who had been drafted into staff work because he spoke French and English. He had never joined the Nazi Party. He had also never openly opposed it. That difference had begun to trouble him. Beside Adler stood Captain Ernst Keller, 30 years old, pale and visibly exhausted. Keller had served as a railway liaison officer in Poland and later as an operations clerk on the Eastern Front. He had burned several papers before surrendering. He had kept one. The folded page rested inside his jacket, close to his chest. At the opposite end of the formation stood Colonel Heinrich Falk, a narrow-faced officer with bright, angry eyes. Falk had been a Nazi before joining the army and remained one after the regime's collapse. He regarded surrender as temporary, Hitler's death as martyrdom, and the Americans as culturally inferior men fortunate enough to possess endless fuel. Near him stood 2 younger officers who watched Falk for guidance. Von Rothenburg knew what they believed. He also knew that confronting them would divide the group before negotiations began. So he had done what he had done many times during the war. He postponed the moral question in favor of maintaining order. At 8:45, American soldiers entered the courtyard. They positioned themselves beside the flagpole, the reviewing platform, and the table where the surrender papers waited. Their movements were efficient but not triumphant. Von Rothenburg found that unsettling. He had expected mockery from the victors. Smiles, cigarettes, loud jokes. Instead, the Americans behaved as if victory had created more work. A military band took its place beside the main building. Major Adler leaned slightly toward Keller. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "follow the ceremony." Keller kept his eyes ahead. "I know." "Do you?" Keller swallowed. "I said I know." The main gate opened. General George S. Patton entered the courtyard. Even those Germans who hated him recognized him immediately. The polished helmet, the stars, the riding posture that made the courtyard seem like an extension of a battlefield. Patton walked beside Colonel Hayes and two other officers. He did not hurry. He looked along the German formation once, slowly, with the expression of a man inspecting a defensive position. Von Rothenburg stepped forward. "General Patton." "General von Rothenburg." Their salutes were brief. Von Rothenburg spoke in English. "My officers are prepared to surrender their commands and cooperate in accordance with the terms established by the Allied authorities." Patton's eyes moved across the decorations on the German general's chest. "You speak excellent English. My mother was educated in England. Then you'll understand me when I tell you that cooperation is measured by conduct, not prepared statements." Von Rothenburg's jaw tightened. "Of course." Patton turned to Hayes. "Proceed." The American officers moved to their positions. The German formation faced the flagpole. Von Rothenburg returned to the front rank. The ceremony began with the reading of the surrender conditions. No German officer would retain command authority except as authorized by the occupying forces. All weapons, records, communications equipment, vehicles, and military property were to be surrendered. Individuals suspected of war crimes would be detained and investigated. German personnel were required to obey Allied instructions. Each sentence landed differently upon the men in formation. Some heard defeat, some heard survival, some heard the opening language of future trials. When the reading ended, an American sergeant fastened the flag to the rope. The band prepared to play. Patton stood on the reviewing platform, his hands resting behind his back. The courtyard became perfectly still. Von Rothenburg looked toward the flag. He had seen flags raised over victories and lowered over graves. He had saluted the black, white, and red colors of Imperial Germany. He had served the republic that followed. Then he had watched the swastika spread across government buildings, uniforms, schools, and public squares. He had told himself that flags changed while the army remained. Now the army was gone. From the far right of the formation came a quiet voice. "Remember your oath." "Colonel Falk." The words barely carried beyond the nearest officers, but they moved through the formation like an electrical current. Von Rothenburg heard them. He should have turned. He should have given an order. He should have ended the matter before it began. Instead, he remained facing forward. Once again, he postponed the moral question to preserve unity. The band began to play. The American flag started upward. Major Adler raised his right hand in a conventional military salute. 11 others followed. Captain Keller hesitated. He saw Colonel Falk's arm shoot forward in the rigid Nazi salute. One officer followed Falk, then another. Movement spread. Keller's breath caught in his throat. He thought of the paper inside his jacket. He thought of a railway platform in Poland. He thought of men in black uniforms loading families into freight cars while army guards stood nearby. His right arm began to rise. For one terrible second, it moved forward. Then he bent his elbow and brought his hand to the edge of his cap in a military salute. He was the 12th. 41 arms extended toward the American flag. "Hail Hitler!" The word struck the stone walls and returned as an echo. The American band did not stop. The flag continued climbing. No one fired. No one shouted an order. On the reviewing platform, Patton stood completely still. Colonel Hayes turned his head slightly toward him. Patton's face revealed almost nothing. Only his hands changed. They closed slowly behind his back until the leather of his gloves creaked. The anthem continued. The 41 German officers held their arms extended. Some looked proud, some frightened. Several appeared to regret the gesture before it was finished. Von Rothenburg stared at the flag. He had not planned this. That was the defense forming in his mind. He had not ordered it. He had merely failed to prevent it. The anthem reached its final notes. The American flag touched the top of the pole and opened in the wind. Patton lowered his salute. The 12 German officers lowered theirs. The other 41 brought their arms down. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then von Rothenburg stepped toward the surrender table. He told himself that the ceremony must continue, that discipline required continuity, that a public argument would make matters worse. He reached for the pen. "Stop." Patton did not shout. He did not need to. Von Rothenburg's hand froze above the document. Patton stepped down from the platform and walked across the courtyard. Every heel strike sounded distinct. He stopped several feet from von Rothenburg. "General," Patton said, "before you sign anything, I would like to know exactly what I just witnessed." Von Rothenburg drew himself upright. A gesture by individual officers. 41 individuals performing the same gesture at the same moment and shouting the same words? They acted from emotion. So did every mob in history. Von Rothenburg's cheeks reddened. My men have lost their country, their army, and in many cases their families. Their reaction should not be mistaken for an operational threat. I didn't ask whether it was an operational threat. Patton stepped closer. I asked what it meant. Von Rothenburg glanced at the formation. It meant that they remember the oath they swore. Patton studied him in silence. Then he looked past him at the German officers. When he spoke again, his voice carried it across the entire courtyard. Then before we discuss surrender, we are going to discuss that oath. Patton paced slowly in front of the German formation. He did not begin with anger. Anger was expected. The German officers knew how to resist anger. They could dismiss it as the emotion of a victorious enemy. Patton began with a question. How many of you swore a personal oath to Adolf Hitler? No one answered. I'm not asking for volunteers, raise your hands. Several men looked toward von Rothenburg. Patton noticed. That habit right there, he said, pointing at them. Looking to a superior before answering a question about your own life. We're going to examine that, spoke. The oath was required by law. I didn't ask why you swore it. Patton faced the formation again. How many? Slowly, hands began to rise. Nearly all of them. Even several of the 12 who had refused the Nazi salute acknowledged taking the oath. Patton nodded. How many believed in Hitler when you took it? Fewer hands rose. Colonel Falk's went up immediately. 2 younger officers followed. Several others raised theirs with visible reluctance. How many stopped believing in him before the war ended? Hands moved uncertainly. Patton looked at von Rothenburg. And you, General? I believed Hitler restored German unity and strength. Later, I came to believe his political judgment was disastrous. Disastrous. Patton repeated the word as if testing its weight. A failed offensive is disastrous. A flooded bridge is disastrous. What word do you use for a government that builds an industry out of murder? Von Rothenburg's expression hardened. The Wehrmacht was not responsible for every policy of the state. There it is. Patton turned toward Hayes. Colonel, write that down. We've heard the first version. The first version of what? Von Rothenburg asked. The story Germany will tell itself if men like you are permitted to choose the language. Patton looked along the formation. You will say the army fought a normal war while politicians committed crimes somewhere beyond your knowledge. You will say the SS belonged to another world. You will say you served Germany, not Hitler, even though most of you just saluted Hitler after Germany had surrendered. A murmur moved through the ranks. Patton stopped in front of Colonel Falk. Falk stared back without lowering his eyes. You object, Colonel? I object to a conqueror defining German honor. Honor doesn't belong to Germany or America. It belongs to conduct. You bombed our cities, yes. You killed German women and children. Civilians died in this war. Too many. That is part of the moral burden carried by every nation that fought it. Falk appeared surprised by the answer. Patton continued. But the suffering of German civilians does not erase what your government did. One grave does not close another. We defended Europe against Bolshevism. You invaded countries that had not attacked you. We obeyed orders. Patton's eyes narrowed. And there is the second version. He turned away from Falk. First, you were separate from the regime. Second, you had no choice but to obey it. By the time we finish this morning, I expect we'll hear that you knew nothing, opposed everything, and somehow spent 6 years wearing its uniform. Von Rothenburg took one step forward. General Patton, my officers have surrendered. If you intend to interrogate them, do so according to established procedure. I intend to determine whether they have surrendered. Our weapons are stacked in your depots. A rifle is easier to surrender than a lie. Patton pointed toward the American flag. You were given one simple instruction. Stand at attention and render the courtesy required at a formal transfer of authority. 12 of your officers managed it. 41 chose a political salute to a dead dictator. The act was symbolic, exactly. Patton's voice sharpened. And symbols tell the truth when men won't. The courtyard grew silent again. Patton walked back to von Rothenburg. You keep using the word honor. Let us see how much of that honor belongs to the man and how much belongs to the costume. Von Rothenburg's eyes moved briefly toward Patton's pistols, meaning? Patton turned to the military police commander. Lieutenant, have the 41 officers who performed the Nazi salute remove their dress jackets, belts, caps, decorations, and boots. Inventory every item. They may retain shirts and trousers. A ripple of shock passed through both formations. Hayes stepped closer. "General." Patton looked at him. Hayes lowered his voice. "May I speak privately?" "No. If you have an option, make it where everyone can hear." Hayes chose his words carefully. "We must avoid degrading treatment of prisoners." "Agreed." Patton faced the Germans. "No one will be struck. No one will be exposed. No one will be photographed in a degrading condition. The press photographer will leave the courtyard." The American photographer immediately lowered his camera. Patton continued. "The items being removed are military symbols belonging to an armed force that has ceased to exist. These men used those symbols to stage political defiance during a surrender ceremony. Until they demonstrate that they understand the difference between military service and ideological loyalty, they will not wear those symbols in my presence." He looked at Hayes. "That is my order. Record it exactly." Hayes hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." Patton returned his attention to von Rothenburg. "This is not entertainment. It is not revenge. Your officers will remain clothed and protected, but they will speak as men, not as collections of medals." Von Rothenburg's voice became cold. "You intend to humiliate us?" "No. I intend to find out what remains when your rank is placed on a table." Patton gestured toward the 12 officers still standing in proper formation. Those men followed the lawful instruction. They retained their uniforms. Colonel Falk gave a contemptuous laugh. "So obedience is now a virtue when the order comes from you?" Patton turned on him. "Obedience to lawful authority is necessary. Obedience without moral judgment is dangerous. Your entire defense depends on pretending those are the same thing." Falk said nothing. The military police moved forward. For several seconds, none of the 41 Germans obeyed. Then von Rothenburg removed his cap. He did so slowly, holding it in both hands before placing it on the surrender table. His jacket followed. The decorations on his chest caught the gray light for the last time before he folded the cloth over them. Around him, other officers began doing the same. Caps were placed in rows, belts coiled, boots removed, paired. Medals disappeared beneath folded jackets. The act was orderly, almost ceremonial. Yet with each item removed, the formation changed. The men did not become ridiculous. They became ordinary. Without shoulder boards and decorations, von Rothenburg looked older. Colonel Falk looked smaller. A lieutenant colonel whose chest had carried 5 rows of ribbons now appeared thin and tired. The 12 officers who retained their uniforms did not look triumphant. They looked burdened. Captain Keller stared at the ground. He understood what Patton was doing. He also understood that the American general had not yet reached the worst part. When the inventory was finished, 41 German officers stood in shirts, trousers, and socks on the cold pavement. Patton addressed them. "Now we can begin." Von Rothenburg's face was pale. "Begin what?" "The part where each of you becomes responsible for his own words." Patton pointed toward a row of chairs being brought from the barracks. "You will sit by rank, but you will answer individually. No man will consult another before responding." He turned to Hayes. "Bring the evidence boxes." Captain Keller's head rose sharply. Von Rothenburg looked toward the main building. "What evidence?" Patton met his eyes. "The evidence behind the oath you chose to honor." The boxes were plain. That was the first thing von Rothenburg noticed. No dramatic markings, no blood-stained cloth, no theatrical presentation prepared for defeated enemies. Just 6 brown Army archive boxes carried by American soldiers and placed on a table beneath the flag. A doctor followed them into the courtyard. Major Samuel Levin was a thin man with wire-framed glasses and a medical officer's insignia on his collar. He carried a notebook under one arm. Beside him walked a civilian in an oversized American field jacket. The civilian was perhaps 35, though his face looked much older. His head had been recently shaved. His cheeks were hollow. He moved with a cane and the careful concentration of someone relearning how to trust the ground. Patton went to meet them. Major General Patton turned to the civilian. "Mr. Rosenfeld, you are not required to do this." "I know. If you wish to leave at any time, you leave." The man looked toward the German officers. "I have spent years leaving when men in uniforms told me to leave." His English was accented but clear. "Today I would prefer to stay." Patton nodded once. "Very well." Von Rothenburg watched the exchange. "Who is he?" The civilian answered for himself. "My name is David Rosenfeld. Before the war, I taught music in Prague." Colonel Falk made a sound under his breath. Patton heard it. "Do you have something to say?" Falk remained silent. Major Levin opened the first box. He removed photographs, reports, maps, sworn statements, transport records, and copies of military orders recovered during the American advance. Patton faced the German officers. You have said, or will soon say, that the army knew nothing about the camps and had no connection to what happened in them. We will not settle that question through speeches. Levin distributed photographs among the first row. The men looked down. Some reacted immediately. Others forced their faces into stillness. The photographs showed barracks filled with bodies, storage rooms of confiscated possessions, cremation facilities, and survivors too weak to stand without assistance. The images were documentary rather than sensational. That made them harder to dismiss. Von Rothenburg held one photograph at the edges. His fingers trembled. I had heard reports, he said. Rumors, political detention, forced labor. I did not know the scale. Patton stood beside him. When did you first hear the rumors? Years ago. And what did you do? I had no authority over the police system. That was not my question. Von Rothenburg looked at the photograph again. I did nothing. Patton moved to the next officer. What about you? The man's mouth opened. No, General, not what your headquarters knew. What did you know? I knew Jews were being evacuated from certain districts. Evacuated where? I was not told. Did you ask? The officer looked down. No. Patton continued along the row. One by one, the answers came. They had seen trains. They had heard shootings. They had received orders not to interfere with SS operations. They had entered towns after Jewish neighborhoods were emptied. They had requisitioned buildings whose owners had vanished. They had used forced laborers. They had noticed. They had wondered. They had not asked. Major Levin placed a large map on the table. It showed concentration camps, subcamps, forced labor sites, prisoner routes, and military installations. The system was not hidden in one distant forest, Levin said. It touched rail lines, factories, mines, supply depots, roads, and garrisons. Some facilities were concealed. The existence of persecution was not. Von Rothenburg examined the map. This does not prove every officer understood the purpose of every installation. No, Levin said. It does not. The German general looked almost relieved. Then Levin continued. It proves that thousands of people had opportunities to notice pieces of the truth. David Rosenfeld stepped forward. He held no photograph. When soldiers came for my family, he said, they were not SS. The German officers looked at him. They wore army uniforms. Perhaps they were assigned temporarily. Perhaps they were guarding the road. Perhaps the order came from someone else. I do not know. His fingers tightened around the cane. My father asked one of them where we were going. The soldier said he did not know. My mother asked whether we could bring food. The soldier said he was only following instructions. Rosenfeld paused. I remember his face because he looked embarrassed. No one moved. He was not shouting. He did not hit us. He even helped my grandmother climb into the truck. Rosenfeld looked directly at von Rothenburg. For many years I hated the men who screamed. Now I also think about the man who was polite. The words unsettled the courtyard more than anger would have. He may have gone home that evening and told his wife he had harmed no one. He may have believed kindness during an evil act made the act less evil. Rosenfeld lowered his eyes. My grandmother died 3 weeks later. Captain Keller's breathing became uneven. Major Adler noticed. Keller? The young captain did not respond. Rosenfeld continued. I am not here to say every German soldier knew everything. That would be false. I am here to say many knew enough to ask one more question. Patton looked at the officers and chose not to. Von Rothenburg raised his head. What would you have had an officer do? Refuse and be shot? Protest and be replaced by someone worse? A man has responsibilities to his soldiers, his family, his country. Patton's expression hardened. A man always has responsibilities. The question is whether he uses one responsibility to excuse abandoning another. You speak as a victor. I speak as a commander. Patton's voice remained controlled. I have given orders that sent men to their deaths. I have made mistakes. I have demanded too much from exhausted soldiers. Command does not make a man innocent. It increases the number of people who pay for his errors. Von Rothenburg studied him. You admit mistakes. Of course. Then you understand that decisions in war are not made with perfect knowledge. I understand it better than most. Patton leaned forward. But imperfect knowledge is not the same as deliberate blindness. He pointed toward the documents. A commander may not know every crime committed behind his front, but when trains arrive full and leave empty, when villages disappear, when prisoners are handed from army control to killing units, when forced laborers starve inside military factories, ignorance becomes an achievement. It has to be maintained. Colonel Falk spoke again. This is propaganda. Major Levin held up a German army transport form. This document bears the stamp of a Wehrmacht railway office. Their Sol 11 produced the original seal recovered from the same office. Falk's expression changed, but only slightly. Patton took the form. It lists 6 freight cars assigned to prisoner transport. Railway officers did not determine policy. No, Patton said. They made policy move. He returned the document to Levin. That is how large crimes happen. One office supplies cars. Another guards a bridge. Another delivers fuel. Another prepares a list. Each man performs a small task and tells himself the whole belongs to someone else. Captain Keller suddenly rose from his chair. Every American guard became alert. Keller lifted both hands. I have something. Von Rothenberg turned toward him. Sit down. Keller did not. For the first time that morning, he ignored a direct order from a superior. He reached slowly inside his shirt and removed a folded sheet of paper. I kept this. Colonel Falk's eyes sharpened. What is it? Keller unfolded the page. His hands shook so badly that the paper rattled. A transport schedule. Major Levin approached him. From where? Lublin District. 1942. The doctor took the page but did not pull it away. What did it transport? Keller stared at Rosenfeld. People. The single word barely carried across the courtyard. Patton stepped closer. How many? 812 on the list. Destination. Keller closed his eyes. Several German officers shifted in their seats. Rosenfeld's face became still. Patton asked, what was your role? I coordinated track clearance. Military trains had priority. This transport was classified as security movement. Did you know what Belzec was? Not at first, and later? Keller looked toward von Rothenberg as if asking permission to continue. The general's face was unreadable. Patton spoke. Look at me, Captain. Keller did. When did you know? An engineer returned. He had delivered another train. He was drunk. He said no passengers came back. He said the smell? Keller stopped. Patton waited. He said it was a killing place. What did you do? I told him never to repeat it. Why? I was afraid. The honesty of the answer passed through the courtyard. Not loyalty, not patriotism, not military necessity. Fear. Keller's eyes filled with tears. I requested transfer 3 months later. Did you attempt to stop another transport? No warn anyone? No preserve records? Only that page. Why keep it? Keller looked down at the paper in Levin's hand. I told myself it might be needed someday. Patton's voice softened, though not with comfort. And was that the true reason? Keller took a long breath. No, what was? I wanted proof that I had not imagined it. The young officer seemed to shrink where he stood. And perhaps I wanted something that could accuse me when I became too skilled at forgiving myself. No one spoke. Major Adler removed his cap. One of the officers who had given the Nazi salute began quietly crying. Von Rothenberg looked at Keller with a mixture of anger, pity, and fear. You should have reported this through command channels. Keller laughed once, a broken sound, to whom von Rothenberg had no answer. Keller turned to Patton. I do not ask to be excused. Good, Patton said. Because confession is not a transaction. Keller nodded. I understand. No, Captain, you are beginning to. Patton faced the rest of the officers. This is what responsibility sounds like. Not because he is innocent. Because he has stopped using language to escape what he did. He looked toward Rosenfeld. The survivor was watching Keller. There was no forgiveness in his expression. There was also no hatred. Only exhaustion. Keller lowered himself back into the chair. Major Levin placed the transport schedule inside a protective folder. Von Rothenberg stared at the ground between his socked feet. The armor around the officers was beginning to fracture. Patton knew better than to mistake fracture for change. A man could feel shame in the morning and rebuild his lies by nightfall. What came next had to be harder than shame. They would have to choose what to do with the truth. A light rain began shortly before noon. It was not enough to end the proceedings, but enough to darken the pavement and gather on the shoulders of the American soldiers. Patton ordered canvas covers raised over the evidence tables. He also ordered blankets brought for the German officers. Colonel Falk refused his. I need no charity. It isn't charity, Patton said. It is prisoner care. I would rather be cold. You may prefer whatever you like. Put on the blanket. Falk did not move. Patton turned to an American medic. Place it on his chair. If he chooses illness to protect his pride, that will be recorded as a personal decision. The medic did so. Falk eventually picked it up. Von Rothenberg wrapped his blanket around his shoulders. Without his decorated jacket, he resembled an aging professor rather than a general. Patton stood before him. Tell me about your first command. Von Rothenberg looked surprised. My first command? Yes, a cavalry platoon, 1915. How old were you? 28. What did you teach your men? Discipline, care of horses, formation movement, marksmanship. What else? Von Rothenburg thought. That an officer eats after his soldiers. Good rule. Yes, did you believe an officer was responsible for the conduct of his men? Of course, only when he approved their conduct. Von Rothenburg's eyes narrowed. No, only when written orders reached his desk. No, then why does your theory of responsibility become smaller as the crimes become larger? The German general remained silent. Patton pulled a chair closer but did not sit. You are not a stupid man, von Rothenburg. That makes your defense worse. You believe intelligence prevents moral failure? No. Intelligence often helps men build more elegant excuses. Von Rothenburg looked across the courtyard. My father taught me that the army existed above politics. Governments changed. The army served the nation. And when the government demanded criminal service, we believed the institution could survive and restrain the regime. Did it? No. When did you realize that? Von Rothenburg took a long time to answer. Perhaps in 1938, before the war. Yes, and you stayed. Yes. Why? I believed resignation would throw my position to a party loyalist. Patton nodded. That may even have been true. Von Rothenburg looked up. You accept that? I accept that evil rarely presents men with clean choices. For the first time, the German general's expression softened. Then Patton continued. But a dirty choice is still a choice. The softness disappeared. You stayed to limit the damage. Did you limit it? In certain cases. Name one. Von Rothenburg hesitated. I prevented the arrest of 2 officers accused of political unreliability. What happened to them? One died in Russia. The other retired after being wounded. Anyone else? I protected a chaplain who criticized party doctrine. Good. Patton folded his arms. What did remaining in command allow you to do for the regime? Von Rothenburg's face tightened. I commanded troops. Where? France, Ukraine, later Italy. Did your forces secure occupied territory? Yes. Cuff railways? Collect food. Under military requisition. Hand prisoners to security units. In some cases. Then your position allowed you to save 3 men and help the regime control thousands. Von Rothenburg's voice rose. You reduce years of command to an accusation. No, I am refusing to reduce them to a medal. The 2 generals stared at each other. Around them, the courtyard remained silent. Patton finally sat in the chair opposite von Rothenburg, his voice lowered. Do you know what I think happened to men like you? I assume you are about to tell me. You mistook restraint for resistance. Von Rothenburg looked away. You disliked the crude party men. You disliked the shouting, the uniforms, the political interference. You told yourself that because you privately despised them, your service remained pure. That is an insult. It is an observation. I was never one of them, yet you helped preserve the machine they used. Patton leaned forward. You thought your manners were evidence of innocence. Von Rothenburg's face flushed. General Patton, you know nothing of the risks inside Germany. You're right. The answer stopped him. Patton continued. I did not live under Hitler. I did not have to decide whether speaking one sentence would endanger my family. I will not pretend courage was easy. The rain tapped against the canvas, but difficulty does not transform silence into virtue. Von Rothenburg closed his eyes briefly. Patton watched him. He had spent years reading fear in the faces of soldiers. Von Rothenburg was not afraid of prison. He was afraid of losing the story by which he understood his own life. A prison sentence might end. A destroyed identity offered no release date. Patton rose. You called your officer's salute an act of honor. Von Rothenburg said nothing. Was it? No. The word was quiet. Patton waited. Von Rothenburg looked toward Colonel Falk, then toward the officers wrapped in American blankets. No, he said again. It was defiance. Against whom? The victors. Only the victors. Von Rothenburg's shoulders sagged. Against reality. Patton nodded. That is the first honest answer you have given me. The German general's eyes hardened again. You enjoy this. Patton's expression changed. For a second, the anger disappeared, revealing something older and more tired beneath it. No. He looked toward the flag. I would have enjoyed reaching this courtyard 6 months earlier, with 20,000 more of my soldiers alive. Von Rothenburg lowered his gaze. Patton continued. I do not need your humiliation. I need to know whether the men who may help administer this country understand what they served. You intend to use us. We intend to rebuild roads, hospitals, water systems, courts, farms, and local government. That requires Germans. The Allies cannot occupy every desk forever, and you would trust men you accuse of complicity. Trust is earned by conduct, not granted by rank. Patton pointed to the folded uniforms. Those jackets may be returned. Your authority will not. Von Rothenberg looked at his medals on the table. What do you want from us? The truth. That word is easy for a victor. No facts are sometimes easy for a victor. Truth is expensive for everyone. Patton turned toward Colonel Hayes. Distribute the forms. American clerks carried stacks of paper to the German officers. Each page contained 4 questions in German and English. What acts did you personally order, authorize, witness, or assist? What actions did you believe were unlawful or immoral at the time? What did you choose not to report, question, or investigate? What will you now do to assist in establishing a complete record? Von Rothenberg read the questions twice. This is a confession. It may be. Anything written can be used in criminal proceedings. Yes, then no rational man will answer honestly. Patton looked at him. A moment ago you asked what I wanted. Now you know. You are asking men to condemn themselves. I am asking them to stop requiring other people to carry the truth for them. Colonel Falk tore his form in half. The sound was sharp. Patton did not react. Falk tore it again and dropped the pieces. I recognize no moral authority in this proceeding. Patton nodded to Hayes. Record refusal. 2 younger officers followed Falk's example. A 4th man started to tear his paper, then stopped. Patton looked across the group. No one will receive immunity for writing. No one will be punished merely for refusing. Refusal will mean separate detention and full investigation without your cooperation. Von Rothenberg studied the page. How long do we have? As long as necessary today, and if we answer, you will be interviewed individually. Evidence will be checked. Lies will matter more than admissions. Captain Keller immediately began writing. His pen moved slowly. Major Adler followed. Then one of the officers who had given the Nazi salute placed his form on his knee and wrote his name. Others watched. The first sentence was the hardest. Patton knew that. On battlefields, movement often began when one vehicle crossed an exposed road and proved it could survive. Moral movement was similar, except no one could see where the mines were buried. Von Rothenberg held the pen above the page. What will happen to Germany? He asked. Patton answered without hesitation. That depends partly on whether Germans decide they were defeated by stronger armies or defeated by the consequences of what they accepted. Von Rothenberg's pen touched the paper. He wrote, I remained in service after I understood that the government I served had become criminal. He stopped. His hand trembled. Then he continued. The statements took 4 hours. Rain came and went. Coffee arrived for the Americans. Thin soup and bread were provided to the prisoners. Patton remained in the courtyard. Hayes urged him twice to return to headquarters for scheduled meetings. Patton sent messages postponing them. This is the meeting, he said. The officers wrote in different ways. Some filled pages quickly, as if speed might prevent thought. Others stared at one sentence for 20 minutes. A colonel admitted ordering homes cleared for military use in Ukraine without asking what happened to the displaced families. A medical officer described receiving underfed forced laborers and returning those unable to work to the SS, despite knowing they might be killed. A transport major acknowledged that he had altered rail schedules to move prisoners while wounded German soldiers waited for trains. One officer wrote only 3 words, I knew nothing. During his interview, Major Levin placed 5 documents in front of him carrying his signature. The officer began again. Captain Keller wrote 12 pages. Major Adler wrote 6 and then requested more paper. General von Rothenberg wrote 4 pages in disciplined handwriting. He did not describe himself as a victim. He did not claim resistance. He listed the moments when he had objected privately, complied publicly, and later used private objection as evidence of personal honor. Near the end, he wrote, I believed that remaining inside the institution preserved a better Germany. I did not sufficiently consider how my continued service preserved the government that was destroying it. When he finished, he folded his hands over the paper. Colonel Falk remained seated with a blanket across his knees and contempt on his face. You will regret teaching Germans to betray their officers, he told Patton. Patton stood nearby reading an interview summary. No, I would regret teaching them that loyalty excuses everything. An army cannot function if every soldier judges every command. An army cannot remain human if no soldier judges any command. Your own men obey you. They are required to refuse an unlawful order. Falk laughed. In theory. Patton looked at him. Sometimes theory is the line between discipline and a gang. Falk leaned forward. You think this war proved your system morally superior? I think your system invaded its neighbors, murdered civilians, destroyed Germany, and now sits in shirt sleeves beneath someone else's flag. You had more factories. We did more oil. Yes, more men eventually. So spare us the sermon. You won through production. Patton closed the summary. Production helped win the war. It did not make you salute Hitler this morning. Falk's mouth tightened. That was loyalty. To a dead man who left your cities in ruins. To an idea. There are ideas worth dying for. Patton stepped closer. There are also ideas that persuade fools to make everyone else die first. Falk stood abruptly. American guards raised their weapons. Patton lifted one hand, signaling them to hold. Falk was shorter than Patton. Without his boots and jacket, the difference was more obvious. You insult Germany. No, Hitler insulted Germany. He told an educated people that greatness required persecution, conquest, and obedience. Then he hid underground while children defended Berlin. Falk's face twisted. You know nothing of faith. I know enough not to place mine in a politician. For an instant it seemed Falk might strike him. Patton did not move. Von Rothenburg rose from his chair. Colonel Falk. The words carried the authority of decades. Falk turned. Von Rothenburg stood wrapped in an American blanket, without medals, without boots, and without legal command. Yet for the first time that day he spoke with moral clarity. Sit down. Falk stared at him. You have surrendered more than your sword. Yes, Von Rothenburg said. I have surrendered a lie. The courtyard became silent. Falk looked around at the other officers. Many avoided his eyes. Some did not. Captain Keller met his gaze directly. Falk sat. Patton studied von Rothenburg. The German general seemed surprised by his own words. Patton walked to him. Why did you say that? Because it is true. Which lie? Von Rothenburg looked toward his folded uniform. That the army could serve evil without becoming part of it. Patton said nothing. Von Rothenburg continued. I still believe many soldiers fought for their comrades, their families, and what they understood as Germany. I will not call every private a criminal. Nor should you. But institutions are also defined by what they make possible. Yes, the German general looked at David Rosenfeld, who had remained seated beneath the canvas shelter. I do not know how to repair what was done. Rosenfeld answered from his chair. You cannot. Von Rothenburg flinched. Rosenfeld stood with difficulty. You speak of repair because soldiers repair bridges and roads. Some things are not bridges. He stepped closer. My parents will not return because you write honestly today. My sister will not grow older. My grandmother will not leave the truck. Von Rothenburg lowered his head. Rosenfeld continued. But the fact that you cannot repair the past does not excuse you from protecting the future. Patton watched the German general absorb the words. What would that require? Von Rothenburg asked. Rosenfeld's expression remained guarded. When other men say they knew nothing, tell them what you knew. That is not enough. No. When they say they had no choice, tell them about the choices you avoided. Von Rothenburg nodded slowly. And when young Germans ask whether their fathers were honorable soldiers, Rosenfeld looked toward the rows of uniforms. Tell them honor is not inherited with a medal. Major Levin closed the final evidence box. The afternoon light had begun to change. The American flag moved gently above the courtyard. Patton turned to Hayes. How many completed statements? 38, sir. Refusals, 3, and the others. Hayes glanced at his notes. The 12 who rendered the correct salute also submitted statements. Some contained significant admissions. Patton looked toward Major Adler. You understood the ceremony this morning. That does not make you innocent of everything else. Adler stood. I know. Why did you salute our flag? Because the German armed forces had surrendered, and you were the lawful authority in this area. Not because you admire America? Not because you have suddenly become a Democrat? No good. Patton faced the larger group. A salute is not proof of conscience. A confession is not proof of change. Today gives us information, not redemption. Several officers shifted uneasily. You want a ceremony that erases what happened this morning. You will not receive one. He pointed toward the surrender table. But you will receive an opportunity to make a different public choice. Colonel Falk shook his head. Another performance. It will become a performance if the gesture says more than the man believes. Patton looked at von Rothenburg. You asked earlier what you would be pledging yourself to if you rejected your oath to Hitler. The German general nodded. My answer is this: nothing will be pledged to me. Nothing will be pledged to the United States. Patton's voice carried across the courtyard. You will acknowledge 3 facts. The German armed forces have surrendered. Allied military authority is now in effect. Your personal oath to Adolf Hitler has no force, legal, military, or moral." He paused. "Afterward, each man who completed a statement may receive his uniform. The 3 who refused will be transferred for separate investigation." Falk smiled bitterly. "And if we refuse the salute, you join them. That is coercion. It is a condition for being processed as cooperative military personnel. You remain free to refuse." Falk looked at the guards. "Free." Patton followed his gaze. "Freedom does not mean choices without consequences." Von Rothenberg folded his blanket and placed it on the chair. "May I read my statement aloud?" Patton considered the request. "Not all of it. Only the final paragraph." Patton nodded. Von Rothenberg picked up the paper. His voice was steady. "I cannot claim that I knew every crime committed by the government I served. I can no longer claim that ignorance of every crime excuses what I knew, suspected, assisted, or chose not to examine. I believed obedience preserved order. I did not ask often enough what that order was preserving." He lowered the page. No one applauded. Patton would have stopped them if they had. This was not a victory speech. It was an accounting. Von Rothenberg looked at Patton. "I am prepared." Patton turned to the American band commander. "No anthem." The officer looked surprised. "Sir? This is not a celebration." Patton faced the German formation, raised the flag to full tension. Nothing more. The rope was adjusted. The stars and stripes opened more clearly in the afternoon wind. The officers stood. 38 who had given the Nazi salute that morning moved into formation beside the 12 who had not. 3 remained seated. Colonel Falk and the 2 younger loyalists. Patton walked to the reviewing position. For the first time all day, he appeared uncertain. Not weak, not hesitant, simply aware that symbols could lie. He looked at Rosenfeld. The survivor gave no sign of approval or objection. Patton looked back at the Germans. "General von Rothenberg, proceed." Von Rothenberg stepped in front of the formation. His uniform remained folded on the table. He chose to stand without it. That decision was his own. The other officers watched him. Some still wore blankets. Others stood in shirt sleeves beneath the clearing sky. Von Rothenberg faced the American flag. For several seconds he said nothing. He remembered being a boy at his father's estate, watching cavalry officers salute the imperial colors. He remembered the Republic's flag rising after a war Germany had lost. He remembered the first swastika banner hung outside Army headquarters and the discomfort of older officers who had assured one another that politicians came and went. He remembered taking the oath to Hitler. At the time, he had treated the words as a formality, a necessary phrase, a political demand that could not change the inner character of a professional soldier. Now he understood that repeated formality shaped institutions. Words became habits. Habits became obedience. Obedience became machinery. He raised his right hand in a conventional military salute. "I acknowledge the unconditional surrender of the German armed forces." His voice carried across the stone courtyard. "I acknowledge the authority of the Allied military government." He took a breath. "My personal oath to Adolf Hitler is ended. It commands neither my service nor my silence." Behind him, Major Adler saluted. Captain Keller followed, then another officer, and another. The movement traveled through the formation, but this time it was neither automatic nor simultaneous. Each man raised his hand alone. Some spoke clearly, some whispered. One colonel could not finish the final sentence. He lowered his arm, wept, then began again. The 12 officers who had saluted properly that morning repeated the acknowledgement as well. Patton had required it because he would not permit them to use one correct gesture as proof of complete innocence. 30 men had completed the declaration when the first of the 3 seated loyalists stood. He was Lieutenant Otto Weiss, 26 years old. His face had remained expressionless throughout the interviews. Colonel Falk looked up at him. "Sit down." Weiss did not. His eyes remained on the flag. "My brother died in Berlin," he said. No one responded. He was 17. Falk's voice became sharp. "He died for Germany." Weiss looked at him. "He died in a street while the 2 who ordered him there hid underground." Falk rose. "You dishonor him." "No," Weiss's voice broke. "I dishonored him when I pretended his death proved the order was right." He stepped toward the formation. The American guards looked to Patton. Patton nodded. Weiss joined the final rank and raised his salute. He spoke the declaration through tears. Falk watched with disgust. The second young loyalist, Lieutenant Karl Brenner, remained seated. When the last declaration ended, Patton stepped down from the platform. He approached Falk and Brenner. "You have made your decision?" Falk answered. "We have." Patton looked at Brenner. The young officer's lips were colorless. "Is that your decision or his?" Brenner glanced at Falk. Patton waited. Falk said he owes you no answer. Patton, Lieutenant Brenner, look at me. Brenner did, you may refuse. You will not be shot. You will not be beaten. You will be detained and investigated. Do you understand? Yes. No officer has authority to decide for you now. Brenner looked toward von Rothenberg. The German general spoke quietly. He is telling you the truth. Falk turned on him. You have no right. Von Rothenberg's reply was calm. For years I used rank to avoid moral clarity. I will not do so again. Brenner stood. Falk reached for his arm, but an American guard stepped forward. Patton raised his hand again. No force unless necessary. Brenner moved away from Falk. Instead, he stood alone between the two groups. I cannot salute that flag, he said. Patton nodded. Then don't. Brenner seemed confused. But I renounce Hitler. The courtyard remained still. I followed him because my father followed him. My teachers followed him. Everyone I admired wore his symbol. His voice shook. I do not know what I believe without it. Patton studied him. That may be the most honest position in this courtyard. Falk stared at Brenner in disbelief. You coward. Brenner turned. No, I was a coward when I borrowed your certainty. Patton looked toward Hayes. Record Lieutenant Brenner as renouncing the oath but declining the salute. Cooperative detention pending investigation. Hayes nodded, yes, sir. Falk laughed bitterly. So the great ceremony ends in compromise. Patton faced him. No, it ends with individual judgment. That is what you never understood. Falk stood alone. Take him, Patton said. Two military policemen approached. Falk pulled the blanket from his shoulders and dropped it. I will not be handled like a criminal. If the investigation establishes crimes, you will be tried as one. Until then, you are a prisoner who refused cooperation. Falk looked at the German officers. You think these Americans will respect you because you crawl? No one answered. You think confession will clean your hands? Captain Keller stepped forward. No. Falk's expression faltered. Keller continued. That is not why we did it. Then why? So the next lie does not begin with us. The guards escort Falk from the courtyard. He did not shout. He did not give the Nazi salute again. He simply walked through the barracks door with his back rigid, carrying the last remains of his certainty, like a flag no one else could see. Patton watched until the door closed. Then he turned to the 52 remaining officers. The uniforms may be returned. American soldiers began distributing the inventoried items. Von Rothenberg received his jacket. He unfolded it carefully. For a moment he looked at the medals. Then he removed two decorations bearing Nazi symbols and placed them on the table. An American clerk reached for them. Von Rothenberg held up a hand. These should remain with my statement. Patton nodded. Attach them to the evidence record. Other officers began removing similar insignia. Patton did not order them to do so. Some kept everything until instructed by processing personnel. Others placed party-related badges on the table. Captain Keller received his boots but did not immediately put them on. He approached David Rosenfeld. The survivor watched him without expression. I am sorry, Keller said. Rosenfeld's face tightened. Patton looked away, giving them the privacy of not being watched by the most powerful man in the courtyard. I believe you are sorry, Rosenfeld said. Keller waited. That does not give me back my family. I know. You know the sentence. Knowing the loss is mine. Keller lowered his head. Yes. Rosenfeld leaned on his cane. But your statement may help identify transport personnel. There may be records. Names. I will provide everything. Then do that. Keller looked up. Rosenfeld's eyes were wet but steady. Do not spend the rest of your life asking dead people to make you feel forgiven. Spend it helping the living find the truth. Keller nodded. He returned to the formation and put on his boots. Von Rothenberg fastened his jacket. The uniform fit exactly as it had that morning. Yet he no longer stood inside it the same way. Patton approached him. You understand that your statement does not protect you from prosecution. I understand. If evidence connects you to crimes, you will answer for them. I understand be required to testify against other officers. Von Rothenberg looked toward the barracks door through which Falk had disappeared. Yes, Patton held his gaze, and when men claim the army was untouched by the regime, Von Rothenberg answered slowly. I will tell them an institution cannot carry out the work of a criminal government and remain untouched by the work. Patton nodded. That will make you enemies. I have spent years fearing the wrong enemies. The American general looked toward the flag. Do not make the mistake of turning today into a legend about me. Von Rothenberg appeared surprised. You object to legends? I object to useful lies. Patton's mouth tightened in something almost resembling a smile. Tell people an American general shouted at you, and they will discuss my temper. Tell them he removed your medals, and they will debate humiliation. Those are easier subjects than the decisions that brought you here. What should I tell them? That you saluted Hitler after Hitler had destroyed your country. Von Rothenberg accepted the words without flinching. And then, that someone asked you why. The German general nodded. Above them, the flag continued to move in the wind. The ceremony was finished. The surrender was not. That evening, Patton returned to headquarters through streets washed by rain. The people of Munich were outside again. A woman pushed a cart containing broken wood. 2 elderly men cleared glass from a doorway. American soldiers distributed water from a truck while children waited with pots and bottles. Colonel Hayes sat across from Patton in the staff car. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Hayes opened his notebook. I recorded your orders and the basis for them. Good. There may still be as objections. There are always objections after useful work. Hayes looked out the window. Do you believe they changed? Some did. In one day, no. Patton removed his gloves. A day can change the direction a man faces. Walking that direction takes longer. What about von Rothenberg? He lost something. His pride. No pride grows back. Patton looked toward the ruined buildings. He lost simplicity. Hayes waited. Yesterday he could tell himself he was an honorable officer trapped inside a dishonorable government. Tonight he knows the border was not so clean. Is that enough? It is a beginning. The car passed a former government building now occupied by American military administration. A new sign had been placed over the entrance. Hayes closed the notebook. You showed restraint with Falk. Patton looked at him. You expected me to shoot him? No, sir. You considered the possibility. Hayes did not deny it. Patton leaned back. That is why rules matter after victory. You bent procedure today. I did. Some would say considerably. They may be right. The admission surprised Hayes. Patton continued. A commander who believes victory makes every impulse lawful is already becoming what he claims to oppose. Then why remove the uniforms? Because the act was connected to military status, and because I believed the intervention necessary. You could have confined them immediately. Yes, you could have completed the surrender and investigated later. Yes. Why didn't you? Patton looked down at his hands. Because later is where conscience goes to die. The answer hung between them. After a moment he added, but necessity is not innocence. My decision should be reviewed. I'll include that. You had better. They drove past a church whose outer walls remained standing, though the roof had collapsed. Inside, beneath the open sky, several civilians had arranged benches around an undamaged wooden cross. Hayes followed Patton's gaze. Do you think punishment can rebuild this country? No. Education, not alone. Trials, necessary but not enough. What then? Patton watched the civilians lifting debris from the church, memory attached to responsibility. Hayes waited for him to continue. People remember suffering easily. They remember guilt selectively. Germany will remember its bombed cities. It should. It will remember its dead soldiers. It should. Patton's voice hardened. But if it remembers only what was done to Germans and not what was done by Germans, then the next generation will inherit grievance without truth. And America? Patton turned from the window. What about us? How should we remember? Patton was silent for several seconds, the same way. Hayes raised an eyebrow. We did not build the camps. No. We did not start this war. No, then what equivalence are you suggesting? None. Patton's answer was immediate. Truth does not require false equivalence. It requires that victory not make us blind to our own conduct. He replaced his gloves in his belt. Our soldiers will loot if officers permit it. Prisoners will be mistreated if discipline fails. Civilians will be judged as a mass if anger becomes easier than investigation. We stop those things because their crimes do not excuse ours. Hayes nodded. That may be the hardest order you've given. No. The hardest orders were delivered to boys who carried rifles. The car entered the headquarters compound. Soldiers saluted as Patton passed. Before getting out, Hayes asked one final question. What was today, General? Patton opened the door. The first day after the war. That isn't what I meant. I know. Patton stepped onto the pavement. He looked back into the car. Today was a warning. To the Germans. To anyone who thinks a uniform can do his thinking for him. He closed the door. Inside headquarters, messages waited from higher command. Prisoner numbers, food shortages, displaced persons, damaged railways, political directives, lists of officials to remove and administrators who might be retained. Victory had produced a mountain of decisions. Each decision carried risk. Remove every experienced German official and cities might collapse further. Keep too many, and the old system might survive beneath new signs. Punish without evidence, and justice would become revenge. Forgive without truth, and peace would become amnesia. Patton entered the operations room. A map of Bavaria covered one wall. Colored markers once indicating enemy formations had been replaced by symbols for hospitals, refugee centers, prisoner camps, food depots, and damaged bridges. The battlefield had changed. The responsibility had not. An aide approached. "General, there is a report from the Feldkirchen processing team." "Already?" "Yes, sir. Captain Keller identified 3 railway officers and a records depot outside Rosenheim. A patrol is being dispatched." "Good." General von Rothenburg quested permission to write to his surviving officers urging cooperation. "Screen the letter. If it contains no coded communication, let him send it." "Yes, sir." "And Rosenfeld." Major Levin arranged transportation to a displaced persons center. Mr. Rosenfeld asked whether the transport records might help locate survivors from his family. Patton looked at the aide. "Make that a priority." "Yes, sir." The aide moved away. Patton stood before the map. Somewhere in the building, a radio played American music at low volume. A clerk laughed. A typewriter struck rapidly. Outside, an engine started. The machinery of war was slowly becoming the machinery of occupation. Patton knew machines had no conscience. Only the people operating them did. During the following weeks, the statements from Feldkirchen produced results. Captain Keller's transport schedule led investigators to a warehouse containing railway files that local officials had failed to destroy. Names, dates, routes, cargo classifications, signatures, and destinations filled thousands of pages. The records did not speak with emotion. They did not need to. They showed how persecution became administration. A request for rail cars, a priority code, a security escort, a fuel allocation, a signature, a departure time. Keller spent days identifying handwriting, office procedures, and code words. He was not treated as a hero. He remained a prisoner and a potential defendant. That distinction mattered to Patton. Cooperation could reduce uncertainty. It did not erase responsibility. Major Adler helped American authorities locate civilian officials who had opposed party directives, as well as others falsely claiming resistance. Several German officers from the ceremony were released after screening. Others remained under investigation. 2 were transferred to war crimes authorities when their statements conflicted with recovered documents. General von Rothenburg stayed in custody. His interviews lasted for weeks. He described meetings in which senior officers dismissed reports of mass shootings as matters for security forces. He identified a general who had ordered cooperation with an SS unit. He admitted authorizing anti-partisan operations in which civilians were punished collectively. He did not know whether his honesty would lead to release or trial. For the first time in years, he stopped measuring truth by personal advantage. One afternoon, Patton visited the detention facility. Von Rothenburg was seated at a wooden table writing a letter. He stood when Patton entered. "General, sit down." Von Rothenburg obeyed. Patton noticed several pages filled with handwriting. "Memoir? No. Confession? Perhaps. To whom? My grandson, if he is alive." Patton pulled out the opposite chair. "What are you telling him?" "That his grandfather was not the man he believed himself to be. Children require more than self-condemnation." "I know." Von Rothenburg folded the letter. "I am also telling him that shame can become another form of vanity if it remains focused only on oneself." Patton looked at him with interest. "Rosenfeld." "Yes, what did he say?" "That my feelings do not rebuild the lives destroyed by my service. He's right." "I know." Von Rothenburg studied Patton. "Do you never tire of agreeing with the harshest interpretation?" "Often. It simply tends to survive inspection." The German general almost smiled. Then his expression grew serious. "I have been thinking about Colonel Falk. He is under investigation, I know. He is suspected of ordering the execution of prisoners during the retreat." Von Rothenburg closed his eyes. "I recommended him for promotion in 1943. Did you know?" "Not of executions." "What did you know?" "He was ruthless, politically reliable, effective in maintaining discipline." "And you rewarded him?" "Yes." Patton waited. Von Rothenburg looked toward the barred window. "I told myself men like Falk were useful tools that shape the hand that keeps using them." "Yes." "Will you include that in the letter?" "Yes." Patton rose. Von Rothenburg remained seated. "General Patton." Patton stopped. "At the ceremony you said my oath no longer commanded my silence." "I remember." I once believed breaking an oath was the greatest dishonor available to a soldier. And now? Von Rothenberg touched the folded letter. Now I believe keeping the wrong oath can be worse. Patton nodded. That lesson cost Europe enough. He walked toward the door. Patton turned again. Why did you remain that day? At the barracks? Yes, you could have ordered the arrest and left. Patton considered giving a sharp Instead, he told the truth. Because I was angry. Von Rothenberg seemed surprised. Patton continued. I had seen camps. Lost soldiers. Destroyed towns. Then I watched men salute the author of it all. You wish to punish us. Yes, the honesty unsettled von Rothenberg. Then how can you claim the proceeding was justice? I don't claim purity. Patton's voice became firm. I claim responsibility for controlling what anger wanted to do. Von Rothenberg said nothing. Anger told me you deserved humiliation. Command told me prisoners required protection. Evidence told me some of you were guilty, some ignorant, some compromised, and some all three. Patton opened the door. Justice begins when we refuse to let anger perform the investigation. He left. Von Rothenberg sat alone for a long time. Then he reopened the letter to his grandson and added one sentence. The victorious general was not free of anger. He was responsible for what he permitted anger to become. By summer, the Feldkirchen ceremony had already begun changing in the telling. American soldiers said Patton had forced 100 Nazi generals to crawl beneath the flag. German prisoners claimed he had threatened to execute anyone who refused to salute. A newspaper correspondent heard that Patton had burned their uniforms. None of it was true. The truth was less spectacular and more difficult. 53 officers had arrived carrying different degrees of knowledge, guilt, fear, and loyalty. 41 had performed a Nazi salute. Their military symbols had been temporarily removed. Evidence had been presented. Statements had been written. One man had remained openly loyal to Hitler. Another had admitted he no longer knew what to believe. Most had chosen cooperation. No single gesture had transformed them. No speech had redeemed them. Patton understood that real change rarely provided the clean ending preferred by stories. Some officers later returned to old excuses. One claimed his statement had been obtained through psychological pressure. Another minimized his admissions when speaking to his family. Several cooperated only while they believed cooperation would improve their treatment. But others continued. Captain Keller testified about railway operations and helped investigators decode transport records. He was eventually tried for his own role. His cooperation was considered, but it did not free him from judgment. Major Adler worked with educators rebuilding local schools. He insisted that students learn how institutions surrendered independence one compromise at a time. Von Rothenberg gave testimony concerning military cooperation with Nazi security forces. He faced public hatred from former comrades who called him a traitor. He answered them with the same sentence. Silence was the loyalty that brought us here. David Rosenfeld located one cousin through displaced person records. No one else from his immediate family was found. He returned to Prague after recovering enough strength to travel. Years later, he resumed teaching music, though he refused to describe survival as victory. Colonel Falk was charged in connection with the execution of prisoners. His guilt was determined through evidence and testimony, not because he had refused a salute. That distinction mattered. Without it, the ceremony would have become another story about power forcing submission. With it, the event became something else. A confrontation between identity and responsibility. Patton rarely spoke about Feldkirchen afterward. When Hayes mentioned that soldiers were turning the event into a legend, Patton frowned. Legends are lies that have learned to stand at attention. Should we correct the record? Yes. What should it say? Patton looked at the occupation map. Say the prisoners were treated lawfully. Say evidence was preserved. Say statements were voluntary under conditions of detention. Say one officer was transferred after refusing cooperation. That sounds less dramatic. Good records often do. Hayes closed the folder. And the meaning? Meaning does not belong in an operations report. Where does it belong? Patton thought of the boy beside the crater, marching a wooden soldier along broken pavement. In what people teach their children. Months after the war ended, Patton visited a German school being prepared to reopen. Windows had been replaced with temporary panels. The walls still bore lighter rectangles where portraits of Nazi leaders had been removed. A German teacher showed him a stack of new lessons. Government, law, individual rights, the responsibilities of citizens. Patton flipped through the pages. Will this be enough? The teacher asked. No. The man appeared discouraged. Patton closed the book, but it is necessary. Outside, children were clearing stones from the schoolyard. One boy found a rusted military badge in the dirt. He held it up. Another child asked what it was. The teacher walked over and took the badge gently. Patton could not hear what he told them. That, Patton realized, was where the next war would be won or lost. Not by tanks, not by flags raised over captured buildings. By the answer an adult gave when a child asked what an old symbol meant. The armies of the Reich had been defeated. Its explanations remained alive. We only followed orders. We knew nothing. We were soldiers, not politicians. Everyone believed it. No one could resist. Those sentences would outlive bunkers and uniforms because they offered comfort without responsibility. Patton had spent his career studying movement. He understood that armies advanced through roads, fuel, command, and momentum. Lies advanced in similar ways. A sentence repeated at a dinner table, a fact omitted from a lesson, a father presenting fear as duty, a commander describing obedience as honor. Soon an entire generation could inherit a version of the past in which no one had chosen anything. Patton stood in the schoolyard as the children carried stones into a pile. The teacher approached. "General, one of the boys wishes to ask you a question." A thin child stepped forward. He could not have been more than 10. The teacher translated. "He asks whether German soldiers were brave." Patton looked at the boy. It would have been easy to say no. It would have been satisfying to condemn an entire defeated army in one sentence. It would also have been false. "Some were brave," Patton said. The teacher translated. The boy listened. Patton continued. "Bravery tells you what a man is willing to face. It does not tell you whether the cause is right." The teacher translated again. The child looked down at the badge in the teacher's hand. Patton knelt so they were closer to eye level. A man can be brave and wrong. He can be loyal and wrong. He can obey and still be responsible. The boy asked another question. "What should a soldier do if an order is wrong?" Patton was silent. Around him stood American officers, German teachers, and children born beneath a dictatorship they had been too young to understand. He thought of the answers military institutions preferred. Follow procedure. Report through channels. Obey unless the order is clearly unlawful. All were necessary, none were complete. He must be willing to pay the price of refusing, Patton said. The teacher translated. The boy frowned. "That is difficult." "Yes," Patton replied. "That is why moral courage is rarer than physical courage." The child nodded, though Patton could not tell how much he understood. Perhaps understanding would come later, perhaps it would not. Patton stood. As he left the schoolyard, bells rang from a church under repair. Their sound was uneven, one bell cracked by bombing, but the rhythm carried across the city. He paused beside his staff car. The war in Europe was over. Yet Patton knew victory was not a permanent possession. It was a responsibility renewed by each generation. Defeating an army could stop its advance. Defeating an ideology required people to recognize the small permissions through which it had grown. The joke repeated without objection. The neighbor taken away without inquiry. The order obeyed without examination. The promotion accepted despite knowledge of the man offering it. The salute performed because everyone else had raised an arm. No nation was immune to those failures. No uniform prevented them. No victory erased the need for vigilance. Patton entered the car. As it pulled away, he looked back at the children moving stones from the schoolyard. They were rebuilding a place where questions could be asked. That, he thought, might matter more than any salute. The final battle was not against Germany. It was against the part of human nature that preferred obedience to judgment, belonging to conscience, and comforting myths to difficult truth. It was a battle no army could win once and for all. But on a gray morning outside Munich, 53 men had been forced to recognize that surrender was more than placing weapons on the ground. For some, it meant surrendering the lies that had allowed them to carry those weapons. For Patton, it meant learning that justice demanded more discipline than anger. For the generations that followed, the lesson was simpler to state and harder to live. A uniform may explain a man's duty. It can never replace his conscience.